Welcome to Blaze News, the mandate day 4. During his confirmation hearing, Pete Hegseth, an Army veteran, said that his new role of Defense Secretary is the most important deployment of his life. Earlier today, Hegseth delivered his first remarks to the press after being sworn in. Watch.
I look forward to serving the troops, the warriors of this department. It's the honor of a lifetime, and we're going to get to work. God bless you all.
President Donald Trump is expected to sign an executive order banning people who identify as transgender from serving in the military, completely gut all DEI programs, and reinstate service members who were relieved from over the COVID-19 vaccine mandate with back pay. Now, Trump has also hit pause on the funds from Biden's Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. Democrats are already crying foul, though, saying that he's overstepping his authority to block money that Congress approved. Down in North Carolina, the Army Corps of Engineers are executing the tremendous cleanup effort, prompting some to wonder why this didn't happen under Joe Biden. Vice President JD Vance addressed the former administration's lackluster federal response to Hurricane Helene during a speech in Virginia earlier today. Watch.
They should have higher expectations for their federal government. I talk to so many people who will say, in effect, well, it's the federal government, oh, the bureaucracy, oh, the red tape. No. The bureaucracy and the red tape is not an excuse for the government to not do its job. We're not going to be perfect. We never will be. Government is as fallible as the people who run it, but we can do a heck of a lot better than we have over the last few years, and that is something that President Trump and I are committed to doing.
And what might be the best thing to happen this week, and it's only Monday, Vance sat down with Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation, and she tried to corner him on immigration by saying the United States is a country of immigrants. Here's Vance's response.
This is a very unique country, and it was founded by some immigrants and some settlers. But just because we were founded by immigrants doesn't mean that 240 years later that we have to have the dumbest immigration policy in the world.
I absolutely love that. And while Senate Republicans rush to get Trump's nominees confirmed, the House GOP is preparing for its annual Issues and Strategy Conference at Trump's golf club in Miami. And the main topic is expected to be a filibuster-proof budget reconciliation package that advances Trump's immigration and tax policy agenda. Now, with all that, let's bring in Blaze News editor-in-chief Matthew Peterson. And Matthew, with the JD Vance interview, the absolute favorite part for me was, I don't really care, Margaret. It might be my entire personality of 2025. And when you look at this, the legacy media at some point, they're just going to understand that JD Vance is smarter than they are, and they're going to stop inviting him on their programs.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we've said previous in other shows, it's the political will, too. It's the will that I don't care what you think of me, right? Number one. And then number two, I'm also smarter than you and will make arguments that should be made. What I loved about that clip was the explain it to you like you're five kind of thing, where, yes, just because we were founded by immigrants and settlers doesn't mean hundreds of years later that this immigration policy we have now is good. But what you see is people rallying around these moments where they instantaneously become, heroes to half plus the country, and they convert people who are kind of wafflers. And the legacy media knows this. They're scared of this. They
know this. And the other thing that we already know, and we're only a week into his vice presidential, after he's been inaugurated here, his role is so much different already than we saw for Mike Pence. This is going to be a very stark contrast, I think, even moving forward, because Mike Pence, yeah, sure, they put him out there. Remember the COVID? Okay, yeah, you go run that, Mike. Okay, that's fine. But JD Vance has a very important role, it feels like, early on.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's just be honest about Pence. I mean, Pence had that beaten dog look all the time, He looked like someone who was sort of led around on a leash or trotted out when he JD's a totally different character. And what you see now is really the fruit of Trump and Vance finding a way to work together on the campaign, and Vance figuring out how to complement Trump. And I think it's very interesting because the sorts of things that Vance is going to do are things that Trump needs him to do, and they complement each other well, right? I mean, it's not they're not vying for the same job, and that's important, number one, right? And then number two, this is something where you can just see Vance as an extension of the entire MAGA agenda.
And Vance, it was funny on X last Friday night during the Pete Hegseth confirmation hearing. He said, "I thought I was done voting in the Senate," but Vance was needed to go down there and break the tie. But then we do see Pete Hegseth come get sworn in, and it's going to be a completely different military. You can see that from the tone that he has already set. What are you looking forward to?
I don't think that this can be exaggerated. The DOD is such a large, corrupt entity, right? It's just this overripe tomato. It's going to implode. I mean, this thing is full of corruption, and a lot of it's just really dumb stuff. You know, the way it works is so inefficient that this has never happened really before, you know, in decades of it growing into this kind of colossus. No Republican has put someone so reformed-minded into place. So I think that there's so many different areas. Obviously, the DEI stuff has to go. Obviously, all the people who were basically traitorous to Trump the last time need to go. You need to cut off the head of the snake. You got to get rid of a bunch of these people who are just no good, and elevate real leaders. Like, that's an entire task in itself. But I think most of all, I look forward to these. There's going to be a series of clashes between this corrupt, sort of bloated thing and Hegseth and his henchmen. Like, they're going to go through and they're going to start picking their battles, and you're going to see them clash. And I guess what I like the most, what's the most fun part about it, is just how shocked everyone is going to be on that other side, that they even have to deal with this at all. This is not business as usual.
This is definitely not business as usual, but there might be a clash between the United States and China. Don't go anywhere, because the New York Times bestselling author Jim Rickards will explain the AI bombshell on Wall Street today. Coming up. Well, we welcome a new year, and it's time to focus on what matters most. It's creating a healthy lifestyle, enjoying the moments with your family, and definitely spending less money going out to eat. GoodRanchers.com is here to help you turn all of your resolutions into solutions this year. When you buy your meat from Good Ranchers, you're directly supporting local farms and ranches in the United States, and you can skip all that imported meat at the grocery store. Good Ranchers delivers high-quality, 100% American meat straight to your door, so you can start 2025 with better choices, better meals, and better moments at home. Visit GoodRanchers.com and use my code Jill to claim $25 off, free express shipping, and your choice of free ground beef, chicken, or salmon in every order for an entire year. You can spend more time with your family and less money going out to eat and enjoy nutritious American food. Then be sure to visit GoodRanchers.com and use my code Jill today for meat that delivers just that. GoodRanchers.com. Use code Jill to claim $25 off and free meat in every box for a year. GoodRanchers.com. American meat delivered. The Senate confirmation hearings for Trump's cabinet picks, they continued today. Scott Bessent, he's the nominee for Treasury Secretary, and he's still on the hot seat. So here to dive in for this and what's going on in the markets today is Jim Rickards. He's an investment banker and author of Money GPT, AI and the Threat to the Global Economy. So Jim, thanks so much for joining us today. Before we dive into all this, if I'm not mistaken, that looks like the White House behind you. What are you doing there?
Hanging out. It is the White House. I'm just overlooking Lafayette. It's the first time I've been in Washington in about 4 years when I don't feel I'm behind enemy lines. So it's great to be back.
Well, so Bessent and Trump have promised that they're going to create an economic golden age. So what do they need to do to make that happen?
Well, the great thing about Trump and Bessent is they've been very explicit about what they're going to do. We don't have to guess that much. And in particular, of course, Bessent will be Secretary of the Treasury. And he's looked at the national debt situation, which is borderline out of control. When people say, oh, gee, we're never going to pay off the national debt. How are we going to pay off the national debt? You don't have to pay it off. You do have to make it sustainable. That means when old debt matures, you have to issue new debt to pay it off. But you have to be able to do that and basically access the market. And for there, the most important metric is the debt to GDP ratio. How much debt do we have versus how much of an economy do we have to support the debt? Now, 30% is completely comfortable. 60 to 90%, you're on the edge a little bit. Over 90, you're in trouble. The United States is about 130%. So this is the highest ever. I was going to say the highest since World War II, but it's actually the highest ever. And it is not sustainable. Now, again, you don't have to pay it all off at once. What you have to do, the debt will increase. It's not going to go. But if growth is faster than the debt increase, then that ratio starts to go down. And the market really likes to see that. So Bessent's plan is, he said, well, if we can have 3% real growth, and then you're always going to have about 2% inflation. I'm not saying inflation's good, but realistically, the Fed wants 2%. So 3 plus 2 gives you 5% growth, nominal growth. If you can keep the growth of the debt to around 3% and the economy is growing about 5%, what's happening to the ratio? It's going down. In other words, the growth, which is the denominator, is higher than the debt, which is the numerator. So again, you don't make the debt go away, but you grow faster than the debt's growing. The ratio goes down, and the market really likes that. So it's kind of fifth grade math, at least when I was in fifth grade. But he has a good handle on it, and he's going to make it happen.
I couldn't agree more, Jim, about the feeling in Washington, D.C. It really felt the feeling for a lot of people like me also was I didn't want to be there at all. And that has changed. That has changed. Talk to us a little bit about tax cuts. I mean, there's a debate about how to tie up the legislative package through Congress. There's debate about what that should look like. What are your thoughts about tax cuts moving forward, and do you think that that's attainable?
I do. Now, the key is, as you know, is what's called reconciliation. You can only do it once a year. There's a parliamentarian who says, what can be included or what cannot be included. But tax cuts definitely fit into the reconciliation budget, the plan. The significance of that is you only need 50 votes plus a tiebreaker. You don't need 60 to break a filibuster or more than that. So the Republicans have 50 votes, or actually 53, if they can keep everybody on board. So they have enough votes to do it, but you can only do it once a year. But of course, in Washington, nothing's that simple. Washington doesn't work. The government does not work on a calendar year. They work on a fiscal year, which actually starts October 1st and goes to September 30th. So we're in one fiscal year now. As of next October, we'll be in another fiscal year. So that gives you 2 bites of the apple, 2 fiscal years in which to do these 2 reconciliation bills. Whether Trump and the Congress want to do 1 or 2, that's kind of an arcane debate. I'll leave that to them. Taxes are definitely a big part of it. And you have to do 2 things. We have a lot of tax cuts from 2017 that are expiring at the end of this year. So those, at a minimum, you have to extend those, or else you're going to get some very large tax increases, which nobody wants. But they want to go beyond that. Trump's looking at increasing the ceiling on state and local tax deductions, the so-called SALT deduction. Should that go from $10,000 to $100,000? That's on the table. And there are other tax cuts as well. No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security benefits for retirees, et cetera. So I started my career, first 10 years, I was a tax lawyer. I was a tax counsel at Citibank, so I know a little bit about it, but I also know it's highly technical. But on the whole, yes, I think we'll extend the expiring tax cuts, introduce some new tax cuts that'll be very good for growth. This isn't just giving away federal money. I mean, it's your money, my money, or the viewers' money after all. You get to keep more of it, and that's good for investment, good for the economy.
Well, Jim, let's get to DeepSeek. It might be the most Googled word of the day because on Friday, China released their own AI platform that is DeepSeek, and that led to panic, especially in the tech part of the stock market. In the AI bubble, they're worried that might start to pop. Now, Nvidia, which leads the market, dropped by 18% at one point today. It lost $590 billion in market cap. It was the largest in market history. So what do people need to know about the situation?
Well, you were kind enough to mention my new book, Money GPT, at the beginning of the segment, but that's all about artificial intelligence. So I've spent the last 2 years researching artificial intelligence, so I'm pretty fresh on the subject. Here's what's interesting. The Chinese DeepSeek is not necessarily better than the artificial intelligence and GPT type applications that we have in the United States, but it is a lot faster. And that's the key. The companies that suffered, Nvidia in particular, are hardware manufacturers. If you can do the same work, faster, faster and with a lot fewer chips, then obviously that's going to hurt the chip manufacturers like Nvidia. Now, that's what it appears to be able to do. I have to question that in the following sense, and I'm not. The Chinese have a long reputation of cheating in technology, stealing intellectual property, et cetera. Is this thing really just as good, but much, much faster? Maybe only, using 10% of the power, the processing power that we use, or were they able to cheat in the training set? The training set is all the material that the large language models and the artificial intelligence algorithms sort of read, in order to learn how to answer questions and basically interact with humans. Now, the training set can be the entire internet. You can buy the entire internet. I don't know how many billion pages, but it's archived and it's available. And you turn your models loose on that training set, and the computer. It's not really intelligence. It's just it's like a good speed reading plagiarist. But it basically learns which words are associated with other words, how to group them, how to come up with grammatical coherent sentences and replies. And Alexa, Siri are examples of that, but so is a lot else. So that's all true as far as it goes. But did the Chinese did they actually find a way to do that with a lot less processing power, which is a big deal, and that's why Nvidia went down? Or did they somehow cheat on the training set and kind of like it's like basically copying someone else's exam, in other words. So I think we need to learn more about it. It is a dramatic breakthrough. I don't want to say that the Chinese did cheat. I don't know that for a fact. I do know they've done that in other cases. So I think we need to learn more. But on its face, it's not better than ours in terms of output, but it's much better than ours in terms of how many semiconductors, how many processors you need, and that's why Nvidia went down in particular. But we have to learn a lot more.
It's interesting that the nervousness, though, that people had nonetheless, as witnessed today. Could you talk a little bit about China? I mean, AI is one thing, but this is a country whose state of economy is not at its best, and we're entering the Trump era. This announcement is timed in an interesting way, right? Not very long after Trump comes into office. Do you sense volatility on the horizon there, or how do you sort of game out China in the age of Trump, too?
Well, right. I definitely expect volatility in U.S. stock markets. Now, as far as China is concerned, their economy is in deep trouble. And there was one of their prominent economic commentators recently who was he wasn't arrested, but he was told to shut up, basically, because he was speaking candidly about their GDP. They published GDP numbers of around 5%. Now, it wasn't that long ago. It was 10% per year. Now they say 5%. The truth is they're probably closer to 2%, maybe even in a slight recession. They're in terms of simple manufacturing, they're now competing with Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand. India is coming on strong. U.S. investment is getting out of China, or at least new investment is not going in. They're anticipating tariffs. Chinese exports are up a little bit right now, but that's because their exporters are racing to get ahead of the tariffs. Who knows when those tariffs are coming? Could be next week, according to some of the things Trump has said. And we talked earlier about the U.S. debt to GDP ratio, how that's really a drag on growth, and it is. And Scott Bessent wants to get that down, and he has a plan to do it. The Chinese debt to GDP ratio is much worse than the United States, and it's a drag on growth as well. They also have a demographic problem. Their workforce is shrinking. People say, well, China's got 1.4 billion people. Well, in about 50 years, they're going to have about 700 million people. They're going to lose 700 million people over the next 40 or 50 years because their birth rate is not anywhere near what you needed. 2.1 is the break. 2.1 births per, say, family is what you need to stay even. China might be around 1, which means that not only is the population shrinking, but you can't even get back to where you were. So they've got demographic problems, they've got pollution problems, they've got debt problems, and the U.S. probably will put big tariffs on their exports. So there are an awful lot of problems in China. They're being glossed over. They lie about it. I mean, let's not lose sight of the fact that they are communists, the real kind. But it's a huge economy. It's important. You got to pay attention to it. But I think there's a lot less there than meets the eye.
We've been focusing on China. Let's not leave Japan out of this because they did raise rates over the weekend as well. And the last time they did it, normies might remember it in August of 2024 as a flash crash. If you want to Google it, you can look up the yen carry trade. But Jim, how much are we going to have to look at this in impacting global markets?
You have to pay very close attention to Japan for the reason you mentioned, Joe, which is the carry trade. So basically, the carry trade is I borrow in dollars borrow yen at a very low rate. So once I borrow yen, I'm short the yen, and then I can convert it to other currencies and invest, anywhere in the world. And with a low interest rate on the yen and a higher return on whatever I'm investing in, you can make a lot of money and you leverage it. Now, when the Bank of Japan starts raising rates, which they're doing, that carry trade reverses very quickly. So you have to unwind it if you don't want to lose money. So what does that mean? Well, now you've got to basically buy back the yen, close out your position. The banks are going to reduce their balance sheets. You're going to be selling assets to get out of the trade. So it's very dangerous for markets. You're right, that flash crash was closely linked to Japanese rates going up. But they have some of the same problems that China has. Their population shrinking. It's a powerful economy, and Japan has much more high tech than China does. So high tech's an asset. But I spoke to Saki Gabara-san. He was a assistant finance minister in the 1980s. His nickname was Mr. Yen. And I said, Saki Gabara-san, you've got so much debt. Again, they have like 3 times what the United States has in terms of that ratio. How are you going to manage that? How are you going to pay it off? And he said, Rickards-san, what you're missing is that our population is shrinking. So our overall statistics are bad, but our per capita statistics are good because the population is shrinking. And I knew what he meant, and technically it's correct. And I said, so what that means is that in 50 years, there's going to be one person left in Japan, and they're going to own the whole country. So he didn't think that was too funny, but that's kind of the where they're heading or where their theory is. But they have, again, their demographic headwinds, possible tariff headwinds. What Trump and Bessent and the U.S. Trade Representatives are saying to Japan, but they're also saying it to China, is, hey, you can sell all the cars and semiconductors and electronics to Americans you want. Be my guest. But you have to make them in the United States. So the whole idea of putting up the tariff wall is so that you have to jump over the tariff wall to be able to sell to the United States. And that's very good for the U.S. I have a lot of people I interact with or debate with, and they say, well, yeah, Jim, yeah, but isn't that going to be bad for Japan or China or developing economies? And my answer is too bad. I mean, we're here to make America great again. If you're Xi Jinping, you should try to make China great again, and so forth. But the U.S. has been the consumer of last resort to the entire world, and those days are over. And U.S. consumption will still, potentially be strong, but you're going to have to make it here if you want to sell to Americans. And that's the message to Japan and China.
Yeah, that is straight the mandate of, I think, this new administration. I think it's what people voted for. Let's talk about tariffs in the larger sense. I mean, larger political use we see of them in the Trump administration. As you know, Colombia pushed back against Trump's deportation plans at first, even refusing 2 U.S. military flights carrying illegal immigrants, which led Trump to threaten them with tariffs, and Colombia fired back with their own. But as of last night, you have the White House press secretary announcing that Colombia caved and agreed to accept all deportation flights, including those from U.S. military planes. So do you think this sets the tone for deportations programs to other countries? And also, this seems to be of a piece with the tariffs in general. In other words, they're tied in with economics is tied to politics in this administration in a way that I think is unique, at least rhetorically, because usually we separate these things in conservative world.
That's exactly right. And my favorite part of the story, at least as I've heard it, I can't verify, is that Trump did this while he was on the golf course. He ordered the tariffs on the 4th hole, and he got noticed that the Colombians had caved on the 7th hole. But right, and you're exactly right, Matt. Because you're combining 2 completely different things. What do deportations have to do with tariffs? Well, on the face, nothing. But here they were combined. Now, what it tells you about Trump's use of tariffs. Sometimes it's very good economic policy. People always talk about Smoot-Hawley in 1930 and the Great Depression. Well, that was a failure. I mean, that was a bad time to put on tariffs because the U.S. at the time was producing more than it consumed. We had a trade surplus, and it would have been better to reduce tariffs and get the American consumer, to have access to cheaper goods. Today, the opposite is true. We consume more than we produce, and that difference is our trade deficit. And that's not sustainable, and all those dollars are going overseas. So tariffs are the right policy today. They were not the right policy in 1930, they are the right policy today. Tariffs are neither intrinsically good nor bad. It all depends on the conditions in which you're applying them. But right now, the conditions are exactly right. Now, but with Trump, you never quite know where you stand. So you have Trump, you have tariffs are good economic policy. I think that's right. But they can also be used as a financial weapon. I teach financial warfare at the U.S. Army War College, and there are all kinds of sanctions and account freezes and other things. But tariffs can be used as a weapon. I would say they were in the case of Colombia. I mean, we had a pretty good trading relationship with Colombia. We actually ran a bilateral surplus, but we really hit them where it hurts. It just so happens that everyone thinks about coffee, and that's right, the price of coffee would have gone up. But one of the biggest exports from Colombia are fresh cut long stem roses. Well, guess what? It's Valentine's Day, or almost. And this is like when they ship all the roses that they grow all year. We're going to be heading for the United States in refrigerated planes over the next several weeks. So Colombia, didn't want to suffer that, and who knows what people were going to get for Valentine's presents here in the U.S. But so the timing was perfect. It hit them where they hurt, and they caved. I think but the message is to other countries. The old expression, you hit one or you penalize one as an example to the rest. This is an example to the rest of the world. Kind of don't mess with the U.S. on important issues such as deportation, where they were going to take back their own country. And the president said, you have to treat them with dignity. Well, they shouldn't be put in, the prisoners should not be put in degrading conditions, but where does the dignity come from? These people are criminals. I mean, and the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they were targeting terrorists and criminals for starters. I mean, they'll get around to the other, 7 million or so eventually, but the initial deportees are identified as criminals and terrorists. So I don't feel, the fact that they couldn't get a bathroom break or a fresh meal on the plane, I don't have that much sympathy for them.
Well, Jim Rickards, great stuff as always, and enjoy Washington, D.C. again.
Thanks.
Matt, it's a new world with Trump and the tariffs and everything that we saw play out over the weekend with the Colombian fights.
Yeah, I mean, it's just seeing Jim Rickards there in the in Washington. It was a pleasant surprise, but it's almost not a surprise now because there's a lot of calls and people you talk to in these exciting weeks. All the best people tend to be hanging around there right now for whatever reason. I don't know.
There's a lot going on in Washington, D.C., that's for sure. And who else is there is Chris Bedford. He'll give us this week's confirmation hearing forecast next. Where will a teacher go to save a kid that's on the brink of losing everything? From Angel Studios, the studios behind Sound of Freedom, comes Brave the Dark. It's an inspiring true story about a troubled teen that's struggling to survive in a world that's let him down. And haunted by torturous childhood memories, Nate Williams finds himself engulfed in darkness when his drama teacher, Mr. Dean, bails him out of jail and takes him in. And Nate must confront his past before it leads him down his own destruction. Brave the Dark reminds us that one meaningful connection can change everything. This powerful film will leave you uplifted and inspired as it shows the strength of compassion and the impact of never giving up on someone. I encourage everyone to go out there and see Brave the Dark. It's in theaters now. Get your tickets today at angel.com/Jill. That's angel.com/Jill. This is a big week for Senate confirmation hearings. On Wednesday, we have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for HHS Secretary. Then on Thursday, we'll see Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence and Kash Patel for FBI Director. Chris Bedford explained in his latest Beltway brief how this will almost certainly lead to Republican infighting, and he joins us now to discuss. So, Bedford, how are these nominations going to spark all of this GOP infighting?
So the Democrats really only have one major target on this, and that's Kash Patel. He's as Trumpy as they get. He literally wrote a Trump children's book about the impeachment efforts called The Plot to Overthrow the King or something like that. He's also someone who's been instrumental in exposing some of the corruption inside of the FBI and the Department of Justice. That was when he was in the House of Representatives. So while he's got the most momentum behind him, largely full Republican support, they're going to try and target him. Democrats are and take him down, and they're less interested in Tulsi Gabbard, who is a former Democrat rising star and someone who Democrat voters still aren't really super upset about. And then you've got RFK, who has even his more outside of the box ideas are the kind of ideas that have been held by a lot of middle class, upper middle class Democrat households for a long time. So he's not a major target. Their enemies are within the GOP. The neoconservatives and the hawks who are suspicious of Tulsi Gabbard don't like anyone who has any kind of independent thinking about what the blob's up to. And also people who are suspicious of RFK. He's faced a completely disingenuous attacks from the right, funded by Mike Pence's group, claiming that it's all about being pro-life. Now, he's got an interesting conversion story about coming back to God, and he's said a lot of pro-abortion things in his life, but he's also made clear to the U.S. Senate that in this role, he will execute the president's vision on abortion. So it's not really Mike Pence trying to come in here and stand up and just stand up for babies. It's Mike Pence trying to sink a Donald Trump nominee who's outside of the mainstream and some of his views, although they're becoming more increasingly mainstream. So those are the two nominees this week who I think are in more trouble. They're going to have a harder path, and that's not because of Democrats, even though, of course, Democrats aren't going to vote for them, but it's because of the Republicans who might flake off.
Chris, I want to get back to the Republicans, because that's of main interest, I think, to us. But when we look at the Democrats and Kash Patel, I guess there's two answers to why they're so, well, there's probably more, but why they're so against him, right? One is, well, he's going to be effective and he's going to be, a fighter and belligerent. The other one that strikes me is that maybe there's a lot more to hide. Maybe there's a lot more at stake when it comes to the FBI, given what we all just lived through. And that's still a point of vulnerability. In other words, it's a defense mechanism rather than so much being, they know he's a fighter, but there's a lot of fighters. And then, so what are your thoughts on that?
That's totally true. He, in an outside role, working for Devin Nunes in the House of Representatives, was able to uncover huge misdeeds within the Department of Justice. And that's something the Trump administration has been working hard to do. You see the CIA is now openly investigating whether or not China intentionally was behind COVID. Whereas previously, under a more partisan Democrat-leading CIA, we were told, hey, don't worry about it. It didn't happen. And even if it did, it's old news or it's fake or it's exaggerated. So it's the Trump administration is working to actually uncover a lot more of the sins of the deep state once they're actually in there and inside. And I know that Kash Patel's people have been working closely with former FBI agents who saw this up front and personal in their years of service, who witnessed the politicization, who saw every single case the FBI was working on, whether it was child sex trafficking, whether it was foreign spies, whether it was organized crime, was put on the back burner so the FBI could be politicized and end up putting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in prison over January 6th. It reminds me of Bonnie and Clyde back in the day. The way the DOJ had this massive investigation of J6 reminds me of when organized crime was running whole American cities, but J. Edgar Hoover was sending hundreds of agents to catch Bonnie and Clyde and get the newspapers, didn't want to actually talk about the real issues that were going on in the country or tackle them because of corruption, because of fear, because it was difficult. Kash Patel is someone who's going to try and reverse course on that. So the Democrats are going to try and use J6 against him. They're going to try and ask him questions like, do you support attacks on law enforcement, trying to tie him to pardons and commutations for those people who are convicted of attacks on law enforcement. And he's going to have to come back at them and tell the Democrats, and Republicans will be watching this, because there are still Republican senators, I'm convinced, who check under their bed at night to make sure J6 isn't in there. They're so afraid of this subject. And Kash Patel is going to have to say, I'm going to prosecute people who attack law enforcement, or I'm going to arrest them. The DOJ, it's up to them to prosecute this. And then it's going to be up to the president and his prerogative whether or not those people will be pardoned. And just try to toe that line in a way that makes Republicans still feel comfortable.
Well, Chris, Donald Trump has been president for exactly one whole week now. I want to know just your thoughts kind of looking back on what we've seen, because we know that Donald Trump, when he's standing up for the American people, is when he's at his best. And we've seen a lot of that already in just 7 days.
It's been incredible. And it's been such a repudiation of what you always hear from Washington, that these things can't be done, that you can't change these things, that the president isn't able to just stop illegal immigration and slow it down or deport people. We have to look at the root causes. I mean, this fight with Colombia is straight up like a plot line out of the Young Pope series, where the president comes in and says, actually, I do have the power to handle this. What are you talking about? Colombia is not accepting people. Raise the tariffs to 25% immediately. In 1 week, raise them to 50% and take away the visas of all diplomatic staff. It's over. And they'll see who's actually in charge. Now, you can hear the State Department shrieking because the State Department of the last 50 years, basically, considers themselves ambassadors for the foreign countries to America. You're constantly hearing, well, that wouldn't be in Colombia's interest. That wouldn't help. Well, who cares? You work for the United States. That's their ambassador's job to seek the interests of Colombia. Ours is to seek the interests of the United States, and repatriating your citizens is in the interests of the U.S.
You know, we talk a lot about shifting the Overton window rhetorically, by which we mean someone says something that was, you know, controversial last year, but now it's not controversial anymore because people start talking about it openly. This is like that. It's the Overton window, but for the use of power, right? I mean, it's like an operational Overton window where you see, so this is what the question is. You see Republicans hopefully going, oh, you can just, as I said on Twitter, you can just sign things. You can just do this. You can just tell the Colombians, like, no, actually, you like the tariff. You don't like tariffs, do you? Yeah, I didn't think so. Let's move on. And you just start achieving goals by using what power you have. And many people on the right, myself included, you and others, have all been criticized for saying, like, oh, you're a bunch of fascists because you want the president to use executive power according to the Constitution. I don't know. It's almost as if, right, the right has been psyoped into thinking any use of power is bad. Okay, we can't do that, you know, and hand wringing. So is this going to change things? Do you think, though? I mean, are people paying attention? Is it having an impact in the minds of the kinds of people who are in power and enmeshed in it?
Yes, because courage is contagious, as we all know. People see this and they say, well, I could do that. And then they join in and they want to be a part of it. More so, the base is seeing it. American voters see it. These mealy-mouthed, well, immigration's an act of love and it's a difficult, complicated question. No, it's not. And when you can simplify this and cut straight through to it and say we're going to protect Americans first, then it makes it more difficult for politicians to get mealy-mouthed. And despite the fact that these people are elected to be leaders, so many of them are actually just followers. They go with where they think the social circles will allow. They don't push the boundaries beyond where they perceive the Overton window to be. And it's usually far, far more restricted than maybe you or I would ever actually think, or the American people would tolerate. This sort of stuff busts those myths. I mean, party after party came in for decades promising to try and control the American border and fix immigration. It was just a lie. It was a myth. It wasn't something that anyone ever actually did. And it was presented as just being far too complicated to actually have an impact. Well, in his first term, Trump proved that wrong. And in his first term, Joe Biden proved the disastrous effects of returning to the old way. Now you see it where it used to be a backburner issue. People didn't care about it as much. Now it's an 80% issue. Republicans and Democrats are in favor of deporting criminals, and even Democrats in the small majority are in favor of deporting sometimes people who are here illegally who've committed offenses. This combination, led by the example of an actually strong leader, it was going to have an impact on DC, and it'll be hard to forget it.
Well, Bedford, thanks so much for your time. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
See you then.
Matthew, as you guys were talking there, it just makes me think of the mandate. This is why this is here right now in this moment. And I look at it and all the memes online and everybody's like, wow, they have power. They're actually using it. And the meme is like, more, right? The guys out there, they feel this, you know, like the taste of blood is in their mouth finally. And they go, oh, wow, we can actually use this. We can do something.
Yes, we have to remember the mandate comes from the people. So the idea that this is tyrannical, to use power to do what the people want to do, at some point it becomes nonsensical. Of course, there's something called tyranny, a corruption, and then there's the right use of power. But there's nothing wrong with the right use of power. That is how the people rule, right? You have to have governance. And so when the mandate is what comes from the people, what they're giving to Trump and saying, please use this and save our country, and then to actually see a politician pick that baton up and start using it in ways that are really commonsensical, but not to Republican leadership, it's refreshing. And I think what Chris said is right. I mean, I think this first week is going to, it's in the lessons, you know, it's like a lesson for politicians for the next couple decades, that it just blew open that window and people realize, oh, wow, yeah, This is real. We actually have to govern.
Well, you've heard what we have thought about this. Now, what do you think of Trump 2.0? We'll have your answers next. Well, what a difference a week makes. Donald Trump has been president for a week. So we asked you what you think of Trump 2.0, and the answers came flying in on X. So let's get to Jacob Strickland. He said Trump 2.0 is like Patrick Swayze at the end of Roadhouse. He was nice until it was time to not be nice.
I mean, first of all, huge kudos. Roadhouse, incredible movie. Everyone should see it. We need to go back to that time period. Also, I think it's just true. It's the point that, you know, if 2020 hadn't happened, we wouldn't have received the gift of this Trump. And because of everything else that led up to it, now it's just everyone knows what needs to be done, and he's doing it. And so is the rest of his administration, hopefully.
Steve Van replied, Trump's first week was absolutely savage. If you use my last name, you're probably going to get picked here. Conservatives and libertarians have been waiting for a man of action to correct the wrong of Marxists in our government.
All right, Steve. The savage is so over the top. It's just,
it's going to get picked.
I know, but I don't fault you for picking it, but it just seems a little over the top. Absolutely savvy. He had to cap it, right? But yeah, man of action, right? Can someone please do something about this? Why do we have people who are just talking before? Why didn't they realize what they could do? Maybe they weren't actually on our side. So refreshing.
And U.S. National Department of Real Talk says way better so far. Let's see if they can stay on offense and win the midterm. Staying on offense is going to be a huge deal because you can't just take a couple of these and sit back and say, okay, we've had a few wins. I feel like Republicans of old would absolutely do that.
Yeah, that's when the EOs become, the executive orders of the president in the first week become press releases, right? You write them out, you send them out. That's what used to happen. I don't think this is going to happen, but that's why we exist, and that's what we're all going to do together. You, the audience, and us together. We're going to make sure that we keep pressure and that momentum continues on into the midterms and beyond.
You know what I have learned is that this is absolutely a different time and place than what we have had before, because it's not often that you see celebrities come out and cry to the camera. Well, you do. You see that a lot. But this time, Selena Gomez actually had to go through and delete her video. I'm sure that you saw it today. Selena was crying because of the mass deportations that are going on. She said, oh, they're taking away all of my people. Well, guess what? I don't care, Margaret. It doesn't matter. You can't use your tears against us anymore. The Hollywood tears aren't hitting like they once did.
Yes, no, exactly. You better delete that because literally no one cares. And I feel like that is happening all over. People are instinctively going to those old tricks, those old tropes, those old, rhetorical flourishes that used to work, and it's not working anymore. And they are just, I actually should delete that. It feels lame now because it is. Because the entire context in which we live, it's all changed. Yeah. So
It's a good time, though, at this point, that you can go through and look at celebrities and not have to worry about every single video that they put out.
Yeah, I'm not going to worry about any of them. And I didn't make a crying video when the Bills lost and I was at that game. I didn't do that. I got up and I drove here this morning, and here I am.
Well, Taylor Swift has done something impossible. I think that she has made it. The Eagles are the team that have booed Santa Claus, right? We know this, that's just who they are. But I think America is actually going to be rooting for the Philadelphia Eagles.
I'm not prepared at this time to answer this question. It's way too complicated for me right now. I want them both to lose, It's like my logical brain is gone. I do think that a lot of people are going to root for the Eagles, but I also think as time goes on, the Eagles are so unlikable in so many ways. So people do want to see the Chiefs get destroyed because of what just happened. But the Chiefs do have a lot of fans, and as time goes on, they'll use their little machine to get people on their side.
All right. What are your final thoughts for the day?
Well, I think today we need to think back while we still have time and remember before we get too entranced in all the goings on in Washington, D.C. after this banger of a week last week, we need to remember the lessons that we all learned over the last 4 years. And one of them hits close to home. There were never any time I gave up, right? I was fighting the entire time along with everyone else here and elsewhere so that we would actually prevail after 2020. But we have to remember how dark things were then. What happened with COVID, what happened to the entire country, the tenor of the entire country, what happened in our cities, the way in which it seemed really hopeless. There weren't any leaders, right? No one was speaking out. And there were times when it seemed as if all of the deep state, all the institutions were against Trump, and that it was virtually impossible that he could win. He was even silent for a long time, right, as they kind of got their campaign together. I mean, he's in the doldrums for a while. And I think what's important to remember is there were people at the time who I never gave up hope, but I thought were crazy because they would say, nope, 100% Donald J. Trump will be president. We will come back. We are so back. And they kept up this energy. A lot of them were younger. And I remember thinking, well, I agree with you in a way, but you are crazy. And looking back, right, after you see what happened, anything can happen. Nothing's inevitable. I always said that the entire way. And all of a sudden, in one day after the assassination attempt, after the Biden debate, things can radically change, and all the work that everyone does pours through that crack like light. And you see in the last 4 years this lesson that perseverance is essential to attain any victory, and that the loss of hope will kill any movement. And moving forward over the next 4 years, that is something that each and every one of us has to remember.
Absolutely. And I think it actually goes back to just staying on offense that we were just talking about, right? Having that hope, making sure that you stay on offense. We talked about Susie Wiles, making sure that there aren't as many leaks this time coming out of the Trump administration. We talked about that on Friday's show. The personnel that Trump is putting in there. Can you imagine how different things are going to be, right? We're talking about RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and Kash Patel this week. How different this administration will be with the right people in place.
Yes, and so now it will be not just the Trump victory, right, as the goal, but that the mandate be implemented, that actually he rolls back all this evil and all this corruption. He rolls back all this tyranny that's built up over the last 100 years, at least as much as possible, and refounds the American Republic. So we're back to the promise of a Republican government in the 21st century. That's the goal. And that is going to seem impossible, even though Trump won and there's a new administration in the course of the next 4 years. But the lesson is it's not impossible. It's something we can make happen.
That's the goal, and that's the mandate. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Rate and review the show. It helps everybody else to find it. And we'll be back to break it all down tomorrow night.